Do me a favor and check out this video. Today is my 31st birthday. I'm a millennial who's also a writer and a scholar. And I hope this video adds some important context and nuance to the conversations we've been having about the political moment that we find ourselves in and how we move forward. If you can't watch it right now, save it to watch later, or you can comment some birthday wishes and affirmations so this video itself doesn't get suppressed by the platform. I appreciate you. If you've been watching the DNC and you saw Barack Obama and Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama, daughter of the South Side, give their speeches, then you would probably understand why their family photo did numbers in Black businesses, churches, and houses.
His limited, narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of two hardworking, highly educated, successful people who happen to be Black.
Then Barack Obama hit us with one of these.
There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
The DNC being in Chicago has me thinking about a lot, about the political legacy of this city, about the historic moments in politics that we've had here, and how one of our more recent historic moments impacted my relationship to politics. The first time I ever voted was in 2012, and it was during Barack Obama's second term when he ran against Mitt Romney. I was a college freshman, I'm from Chicago, my school is in Chicago, down the block from the very park where President Obama gave his victory speech in 2008. If there's anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible,
Who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer.
So that night in 2012, my college had an election party where we watched the results come in. And when he won, I remember some of us running out into the streets, cheering, cars were honking. It was a moment. We felt a part of something special and there was a sense of unity and camaraderie. As this happened, down the street at the McCormick Place, President Obama circled back to the idea that he based his whole campaign on from the start: hope.
And tonight, despite all the hardship we've been through, despite all the frustrations of Washington, I've never been more hopeful about our future. I have never been more hopeful about America. And I ask you to sustain that hope.
And here we are in 2024 at the brink of another moment in history, and it's happening in the same building where Barack Obama brought it home in 2012.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
And I have to admit, there's a good feeling in the air, a familiar feeling, one that Michelle Obama acknowledged as soon as she stepped on the stage at the DNC.
Something wonderfully magical is in the air, isn't it? A familiar feeling that's been buried too deep for far too long. You know what I'm talking about. It's the contagious power of hope.
And on that Tuesday night, the baton was passed to the woman who helped campaign for President Obama when he first sought office. As I see again the outpouring of a people desperate for hope, for change, for things to feel okay again, I'm reminded of those early moments of my political formation and how much Obama's presidency impacted this country and Black people specifically. Barack Obama's presence in the White House did a lot for my morale as a young Black man in this country. And he did a lot of things that positively impacted the lives of Black people while he was in office. And so much went under the radar during his presidency. And often when those things are brought to light, it's met with a very similar resistance that I see people having to policy critiques of Kamala Harris. But I will say that at the DNC, when Barack Obama spoke, he said something that I think is going to be very important moving forward. And I hope these are words that we actually take seriously.
We've all got our blind spots and contradictions and prejudices. And that if we want to win over those who aren't yet ready to support our candidates, we need to listen to their concerns and maybe learn something in the process.
Listen to their concerns and learn something in the process. In some ways, very selfishly, I miss the innocence of Barack and Michelle's time in office. There was so much that we just didn't know, and by design. So much that we didn't hold him or this government accountable to. While I was, like many were, caught up in Barack's sincerity, intelligence, wit, coolness, just the image of the Black family in the Oval Office, or him having basketball hoops installed in the White House or singing gospel music, Barack Obama was building a reputation for his bombing campaigns in other countries, something he once joked about.
The Jonas brothers are here. They're out there somewhere. Sasha and Malia are huge fans, but boys don't get any ideas. I have two words for you: predator drones. You will never see it coming.
Low Key has a song called Obama Nation that talks about this. No Name talked about this in Hold Me Down when she said the first black president and he the one who bombed us. Damn. President Obama is the commander-in-chief responsible for the bombing of African countries like Libya and Somalia.
For us, this president has been the deporter-in-chief. Any day now, this administration will reach the 2 million mark for deportations. It's a staggering number that far outstrips any of his predecessors and leaves behind it a wake of devastation for families across America.
And in 2016, it was Barack Obama that signed a historic 10-year, $38 billion aid deal to Israel. His national security advisor said that we are proud that no other administration has done so much to enhance Israel's security. And while President Obama was doing this, the only person that I heard criticizing him was a hip-hop artist from the west side of Chicago by the name of Lupe Fiasco. And these are critiques that even I dismissed back then as problematic and divisive.
Gaza Strip was getting bombed, Obama didn't say. That's why I vote for him. Next one either. I'm a part of the problem. My problem is I'm peaceful.
So your latest album, Lasers, and the single Words I Never Said is pretty politically charged. I mean, you do mention, though, going against Obama.
My fight against terrorism, to me, the biggest terrorist is Obama in the United States of America. You know, so for me, it's like I'm trying to fight the terrorism that's actually causing the other forms of terrorism. You know, the root causes of the terrorism is the stuff that the U.S. government allows to happen. You know, and the foreign policies that we have in place in different countries that inspire people to become terrorists.
Violence begets violence. Hatred begets hatred. And terrorism begets terrorism. A white ambassador said that, y'all, not a black militant. The ambassador said the people that we are wounded don't have the military capability we have, but they do have individuals who are willing to die and to take thousands with them, and we need to come to grips with that.
He was dismissed for speaking to his conscience and to what he knew then, in the same way that people that are speaking up now are being dismissed as politically uninformed agitators who want everything to be perfect.
I have had many conversations, as you have had, with a lot of young people over the last many months now. They don't know very much at all about the history of the Middle East, or frankly, about history.
Waking up out of my political slumber, so to speak, learning this information about a man in Obama that I related to was devastating. I just did a piece on Dr. Jeremiah Wright and the Obamas. Learning that information was a lot.
The senator came to my home and asked me to stop preaching until after the election. I've been preaching this way for 50 years, regardless of who's running for what office. Carol Moseley Braun, Harold Washington, Barack Obama. That doesn't change or affect or alter the gospel in any way. He said to me, "You know what your problem is?" I said, "What's my problem?" "As a preacher, you have to speak the truth." I said, "That's a good problem to have."
Learning just how hard this country works to suppress information, to keep its citizens busy, distracted, and misinformed has been jarring. But in this moment, as people continue to be criticized and silenced for making demands of their elected officials and holding them accountable, I'm reminded of the DNC in Chicago in 1968, when young people then were protesting the violence of U.S. foreign policy because of the Vietnam War, how the police attacked and brutalized them, how young people were criticized for protesting a war that ultimately claimed the lives of 2 million civilians.
Most delegates to this convention do not know that thousands of young people are being beaten in the streets of Chicago.
Hundreds of students at Columbia University and City University of New York were arrested last night after hundreds of police officers carrying shields and in full riot gear raided Columbia to break up a Gaza Solidarity encampment set up almost 2 weeks ago that has inspired similar encampments in over 40 universities across the country, including CUNY.
I'm reminded of Dr. Ruha Benjamin's prophetic words from back in April of this year, words spoken at Spelman College, an HBCU of mostly black women.
Black faces in high places are not going to save us. Just look at the black proponents of Cop City in Atlanta's leadership class. Black faces in high places are not going to save us. Just look at the black woman's hand, ambassador at the UN, voting against a ceasefire in Gaza. That is, our blackness and our womanness are not in themselves trustworthy. If we allow ourselves to be conscripted into positions of power, that maintain the oppressive status quo. Our blackness and womanness are not themselves trustworthy if we support the occupation of black neighborhoods with so-called better trained police, or remain silent about the genocide of oppressed peoples around the world funded by our tax dollars.
We've never had floor seats to this. You know, the situation in the Congo is dire. The situation in Sudan is gross. And then when you read the record of history, how like this is par for the course. This is par for the course for what they do. What is known as the United States of America is a colonial settler project.
This is a hip-hop message, people-rooted, grounded in a consciousness and a knowing.
The foreign policy is generating uncertainty, deep uncertainty, right? That is cascading chaos on the
But here's the thing. But the foreign policy is not what the Congress members of the House and Senate are campaigning on right now. They need to campaign on domestic issues where they have a stance. So
all of that's important, and all of those babies are dead. All of those people are dead. They're dead. And we're talking about racehorses. I mean, the politics. I mean, there are a lot of folks who are dead today. For what?
Say it again. Say it again. Mock them again. Do it again.
18 years old. 15 years old.
Believe me, I understand the nuance of this election moment. As I shared in my video on Project 2025, Donald Trump cannot get elected. I go into some detail there about what their plan exactly is. A quote that I keep coming back to over and over again in my life and in the work that I'm doing is one that I first heard from Dr. Maya Angelou.
The truth is, no one of us can be free until everybody is free.
And I know it's quoted often in justice spaces, but I want to map out an example of how this applies to Project 2025, which is the white, straight, conservative Christian male agenda for the United States. I think one of the things that will take us further into overt fascism is our inability to find common ground and advocate for one another and see common ground in our struggles. Last year broke the record for most anti-LGBT legislation pushed in American history. Over 500 anti-gay bills were introduced in 2023, which triples the amount that were introduced in 2022. But so many people were silent because they don't really care about gay or queer folks anyway, and the Bible says blah, 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 blah. We've seen laws that targets immigration and immigrants, many of whom came here because of violence that the United States is funding in their home countries. But people were silent because they've taken our jobs and they don't belong here anyway. We saw states like Oklahoma forcing teachers to begin teaching the Bible. Louisiana forcing teachers to put the 10 Commandments up in all the classrooms. Making people who practice Islam or Buddhism or African traditional religions, everyone who's not Christian in the land of religious freedom, being now forced to walk into classroom spaces with the writings on the wall. Thou shalt have no other gods before the white Christian God. The very first commandment. The writing on the wall that says thou shalt not steal, even though by doing this they're robbing people of their humanity. Or thou shalt not kill, even though we're actively funding genocide and pushing legislation that harms people. Life or death legislation. But again, some people were silent. Because what's wrong with teaching the Bible, right? These kids need Jesus anyway. But then we saw affirmative action struck down. Then the DEI initiatives that came from the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. And the Chevron deference ruling. And the Roe v. Wade decision, etc. And now a Trump campaign promises to give police immunity from prosecution, giving them even further leeway to kill my black ass without consequence.
And we're going to give our police their power back, and we're going to give them immunity from prosecution. So they're not prosecuted for doing their job.
They began further criminalizing homelessness to crack down on encampments. And now we're talking about Project 2025, 4 months before the election. This government will continue to close in on the most marginalized amongst us, because they've already manufactured consent from you the people, to do so. Like Chance the Rapper said on First World Problems, y'all just gonna keep clapping and keep acting like Flint got clean water, or y'all don't got teen daughters or black friends or gay cousins, y'all just don't say nothing. But rest assured, this agenda is coming for everyone who doesn't fit the description that I gave earlier. White, straight, Christian, conservative, male. And they will be successful as long as we allow harm to come to the most marginalized and oppressed among us, all because we're safe and comfortable. That is the message behind the poem I shared sometime earlier, and it's true for what's happening in the United States and for what the United States is doing in other parts of the world. This poem by Kashif Andrew Graham. Esther 4:13, the New American Protest Bible. And Mordecai replied to Esther, "Don't think that because you sleep behind a white picket fence in American City, US of A, that they will not one day sterilize you, segregate you, stigmatize you, surveil you, silence you, subvert you, as they have done to others, when you kept your mouth sipping on a lavender latte." We have to see that our struggles are a bridge that connect us to other people. And if we don't have a firm grasp on that and what it means, what it really means, then our path to collective liberation, collective freedom will be much more difficult. And for Trump not to get elected in this system as currently constructed, given the posture of the hearts of the people, Kamala has to win. And I know what a Kamala win would do for the morale of young women across the country. I know because I experienced something very similar when Barack Obama became president. That mattered. I also recognize the anxiety people feel about the threat of another Trump presidency, because that dread, that soul sickness I felt after a very memorable 2016, watching the electoral votes roll in for Donald J. Trump is something I'll never forget. But I also recognize the tendency of us to get distracted, and for us to get caught up in political personality over policy, and for us to cast all of the sins of a nation, sins that it has yet to fully and rightly address, onto individuals that we can tear down for the illusion of progress.
So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us.
People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
So should VP Harris get elected, as I believe she can, we might see more post-racial conversations. We might get swept up in her intelligence, her humor, the newness of the historic presidency. But when President Kamala Harris makes policy decisions that we disagree with, will we turn a blind eye because things feel normal again? Are we going to have the courage to tell the children the truth? Because those of us who were young people during President Obama's run had to learn the truth later. And the difference between then and now is that the people are seeing the violent reality of American foreign policy while being told they should ignore it to save themselves. But the protesters aren't the problem. The uncommitted voters aren't the problem. These are the people holding the conscience of a nation to account, that said no to Joe Biden to even have this historic possibility that we see before us.
One thing you'll see in last night's primary results, vote counts for uncommitted throughout history.
The ballot option has represented voters who turn out for the primary but are turned off by their choices.
You tell us, how broad is this coalition that is behind this uncommitted vote? Who is it?
We were hoping to get maybe 10 to 15,000 votes. That was it. The fact that it was over 100,000 means it was a broad, it wasn't just the 9,000 people in Dearborn, but it was also vast, vast numbers of young people who just said, that's it, I'm out. I'm not going to vote for Trump, but I'm out of this. So why wouldn't Biden listen to this? He wouldn't even acknowledge it, just ignored the 100,000 people. If, as Michelle Goldberg said in the New York Times last Friday, if he loses Michigan, he loses the election. Why would you risk that, President Biden? Why?
These things are sending clear messages to them, people who are more obsessed with power than they are with helping people, that they will lose power if they don't help people.
Say that again.
People who are more obsessed with power than helping people will lose power if they don't help people.
The protesters aren't the problem. The uncommitted voters aren't the problem. The policies are the problem, or to this point, the lack thereof. Because at the end of the day, for example, with regard to the Palestinian people, civilians are getting their lives taken. Real people. And they would not be dying without our tax dollars, without the help of our government.
And that as the U.S. explicitly collaborated with the South African apartheid government, it supported and continues to support the Israeli occupation of Palestine, currently in the form of over $8.5 million a day in military aid. The occupation would not be possible without the collaboration of the U.S. government. That is one of the messages we need to send to Barack Obama.
The outcome of this election should not stop us from realizing that there's a lot of work to be done in this country, if we'll ever get it to really tilt towards justice for the oppressed in this land and abroad.
As Commander-in-Chief, I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself.
Because there are three evils in our nation. It's not only racism, but economic Exploitation of poverty would be one, and then militarism. And I think in a sense, and in a very real sense, these three are tied inextricably together, and we aren't going to get rid of one without getting rid of the other. When a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, it loses its social perspective, and programs of social uplift suffer. This is just a fact of history, so that we do face many more difficulties as a result of the war. It's much more difficult to really arouse a conscience during a time of war. I noticed the other day, some weeks ago, a Negro was shot down in Chicago, and it was a clear case of police brutality. That was on page 30 of the paper, but on page 1 at the top was 780 Viet Cong killed. That is something about a war like this that makes people insensitive. It dulls the conscience. It strengthens the forces of reaction, and it brings into being bitterness and hatred and violence, and it strengthened the military-industrial complex of our country.
For all the conversations about hope being this familiar feeling, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that people don't just want the tingly sensations of a familiar feeling. They want a reality rooted in a hope of a future where we could possibly really be free.
Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go.
It's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us.
We do have some breaking news from the Decision Desk. NBC News can now project that Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president.
I'm not defending it, but I think there are tons of people that don't pay attention to, and I'm not defending it, don't pay attention to politics at all. But while we live in the most prosperous country in the world, people are saying, life's not fair, I'm not doing well, my son's still living in the basement, I can't seem to get a job, I don't like the status quo, I'm voting for something else, and he was the person.
I love you to life,
I love you,
but I do not believe that. I cannot believe that. And the reason I think you believe it is because you don't want to believe that that's what's really motivating them. It's always the case. People don't want to believe what the country actually is, because if they believe it, they're going to have to confront what's in them.
This nation's entire identity, who it actually is premised on greed, ruthlessness, violence, hostility to difference, and arrogance. That don't sound like Trump. That don't sound like the truest expression of this country. And America can't commit enough violence to be a terrorist. America can't lie enough to be a liar. It ain't got enough corruption to be corrupt. It's the exact same ethos. As vile as he is, as much as he's disgusting and disgusts people, he is an accurate representation of this country.
I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them.
Baldwin said the horror of America is that it's changing all the time but never changes at all. There's something like this eternal return because we're dealing with the consequences of the tragic choice at the beginning of the Republic, right? The choice that we reconcile, where we reconcile democratic principles with the reality, with the institution of slavery, with the subordination of women, with the exploitation of children, the exploitation of workers, with the genocide of native peoples, that there is this kind of gook within which the American project came into being. And to confront that is not to condemn us to the gallows.
No.
To confront that is actually to create the conditions to release us into a new way of being.
And so whatever version they told you you was recovering, they told you we was in remission, they told you that wound would heal on itself. People vote based on that premise. People have voted based on the aspirational version of America, the version of America that America tells people it is. This country has spent an inordinate amount of resources protecting its image. In fact, I would argue protecting America's brand is significantly more important than protecting the American people. It puts the resources into its curriculum to make sure you never learn the truth. We do fluff, patriotic stuff, Pledge of Allegiance, America the Great. All that anti-CRT hysteria is about preserving a particular image of America, whether or not it actually matches reality.
I come out of a tradition that has had to deal with the violence of when the fever dream spikes. There are too many people in my tradition who've lost folk. My professor, Albert Rabbitoe, who wrote Slave Religion, lost his dad. He didn't grow up with his father. Why? Because a Mississippi store shop owner shot him in the head because he dared to confront him over the way he treated his wife. This isn't some abstract issue for us. The idea of how we're going to survive and get to the other side when it seems as if the country has lost its damn mind takes on a real tangible kind of feeling, because my mom and my dad grew up in Jim Crow, Mississippi. This isn't slavery.
And too many people overlook those realities and say, yeah, I know we got some problems, but we just need some better people in there. Instead of realizing that these are systemic and institutional failures that a person cannot change. And so because there were people, too many people, if you want my honest opinion, who took their ass to the polls to vote based on the aspirations of America, even though they don't do a whole lot in between elections to make sure that version of America actually exists, are undone. Because they've been fed those narratives, that myth, that pageantry, the iconography for so long, they believed it would prevail at the polls. They don't realize that that is a marketing pitch. That is a PR program that does not match reality. So no, it did not prevail at the votes because it is not anchored in reality. What prevailed at the polls is what is anchored in reality. So my hope is that while everybody's feeling distraught and depressed and scared, my hope is that folks will now have to reckon with the reality of what this country is, that it is nowhere near its aspirations. Not only is it nowhere near its aspirations, it's not really interested in achieving them, and figure out what we do from there.
King wasn't about just dreaming. To be in this tradition, you also got to engage in courageous action. If you don't remember nothing else I told you today, the biggest problem in the world today is that it's too many people that don't do nothing. It's that simple. Biggest problem in the world today is that it's too many people that don't do nothing. We must stand out. We must speak out. In King's tradition of courageous action.
One of the things it is so hard for people who study history to reckon with is the facade, the distance between the facade and the reality, especially when there are so many well-meaning people who consider themselves intelligent and informed, that are still preoccupied with the facade, think they can save it, think it's preservable, think it exists, right? And since the facade is cracked, now more and more people see the reality for what it is. More and more people will have to contend with it. There is power in knowing the truth about your opponent, in that truth being laid bare, and them not being able to hide behind the propaganda that has given them legitimacy for centuries. It just remains to be seen of whether or not people are going to rise to meet this challenge, or whether or not they're still going to try to use the mechanisms that failed them this time and will continue to fail them because they're premised on a facade that does not actually exist. There is power in knowing the truth about your opponent, in that truth being laid bare, and them not being able to hide behind the propaganda that has given them legitimacy for centuries.
Love and liberation to you all. And as always, like and follow for more content.
The reckoning is not only coming, it is here from ends that the oppressor does not yet perceive, and they're the last ones to know. And by the time that they realize it, it's already too late. So I know it's heartbreaking. You should be heartbroken. That means your heart is working. If you are uncomfortable and you're maladjusted to a sick society, it means that you are healthy. That this is a challenging time, sure, to say the least. but I can't embrace despair. Through the demise, my heart is still alive. It looks awful outside, but it's still worth a try.